On my end. Now it went.
Did it go?
Yep. Believe so.
I guess I better unmute myself. We've had some technical difficulties here right at the very last minute. I think it was my fault, as a matter of fact. So welcome, everyone, to COS Indiana Live. And welcome, Ken. Nice to see you.
You too, Dale.
Good. Yep. Well, Ken, this is our let me catch up to myself here. Okay. Everyone, Ken is my co-host, obviously, as you can see. And Ken will be monitoring any viewer comments or questions that you may have this evening. So feel free to input those through the chat feature. So Ken, tonight is broadcast number 252. And you've been on board for 115 of those broadcasts. So we keep clicking along, don't we?
Racking up some numbers there. Now you got to stop and take a deep breath, Dale. You got off to a rocky start, but things just go up from here. So next time you fix your banner, don't make yourself the co-host. You are the host. So
I am the host. I'll tell you, I can't believe that this happened.
It's all right. Loosen your tie and take a breath. We're ready to move on.
I hate it when this happens. Ken, I promised everyone last week that we were going to talk about our record-setting June that we had as far as views are concerned for COS Indiana Live. And so we're going to take a minute here. And we're going to celebrate a little bit because we had a record month in June. So I'm going to go ahead and try and start this, Ken. Okay.
All right. I'll back you up.
Hang on. We'll see what happens. All right, folks. Well, we want to celebrate. We had 118,544 views in the month of June, and that just blew us away. That far exceeded our goal. So I'm not even going to say what our goal was, Ken. It was so was a number so much smaller than that. So I'm just going to skip over that. I'll tell you. Well, we're very pleased, and we want to thank all of you that have participated in this because you have played a role in it. You've watched the shorts that we've created. You share them, you like them, and pass those on. So that's how this works in social media these days. So I want to thank everyone for their participation in that. You have anything else, Ken, that you want to add to that?
Not really, other than, we've been working really hard for, I don't know, years at this point, but certainly the last 5 or 6 months, pushing to make some new goals, reach some new goals, figure out what it is that we can do to increase our viewership and what have you. And, thanks to the comms team, and it is a team effort, we were able to find a way to get ourselves out there. And I think the encouraging part is not only do we have a lot of new people, I think, who are realizing this is a fight, we're in a war, but by getting the message out, we are able to we've been able to get those views. So yeah, I mean, at this point, the hard part is coming up with a new goal.
Yeah. But we're going to keep going forward here. So we'll set a new goal and strive for it. Well, listen, I want to get right into our guest this evening, and we're going to devote most of the program to this young lady because I think what she's doing is very important, and I want to bring her on right now. So, hello, Monica.
Hey guys.
Hi, Monica.
This is Monica Cline, and she is the founder of It Takes a Family website. And we were going to play a little trailer tonight of a movie that she stars in, but I messed it up, so we're not going to be able to play it tonight. But the name of the movie is, I call it a movie. It's actually a documentary, I think is probably a better term, right, Monica?
It is, yes.
It's called Mind Polluters, and it was created and published by a company called Fearless Features. And I think, Ken, you're going to you're going to put that in a link to that in the chat section, right?
A link to Monica's website, correct? You have a couple
Monica's website. Okay.
Yeah, we have a couple of other website links that we'll also post in the chat tonight. Yeah.
Okay. But this documentary, I wish we could have played it because it's only a couple minutes, but it really kind of summarizes what Monica is all about and what we're going to be talking about tonight. So, well, anyway, blame me. I messed it up. So anyway, we're going to jump right into this. So Monica, give us a little background, a bit, and we only have so much time tonight. Folks, she has such a background. We could spend all night just talking about the whole program, just talking about her background. But give us a little synopsis of your background, Monica.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on, both of you. I really appreciate the time to be on your podcast, especially since it's hitting over 118,000 views. So that's awesome. Congratulations. And just so that y'all know, I did put a link to the Mind Polluters in the chat. So if you're interested in watching that trailer, it's on fearlessfeatures.org. It's the very last link there in the chat. I may have actually put it in the private chat. So maybe Ken, do you want to move them over? I just realized I'm in the private chat. Anyway, so you can watch the trailer on Fearless Features, but you can also watch it online through their website. So definitely go there and look. And what this documentary was about is I was just a small part of that film, but it was really about the sexualization of our children, not only in our culture, but very specifically in our public education system. And the reason I was a part of that is because I'm actually a former, this is my past self, a former comprehensive sex educator. And comprehensive sex education is the sex education that the parents all over the nation are very upset about. It is sexualizing children. It is teaching children saying that sexual orientation is fluid, that gender is fluid, that nothing is absolute, that children have sexual rights to have sexual activity. And so that's what comprehensive sex education is. Now, from a public health standpoint, they say, Monica, that's not what it is. But it is. But from a public health standpoint, it's also called sexual risk reduction. And what all that really means is that in public health, if you're involved in a behavior that causes risk to your health, you have two choices. You can either avoid that risky behavior, And when it comes to sex, that would be sexual risk avoidance. So you would avoid the behavior. In other words, you would probably reserve sex for just marriage, and you wouldn't have sex outside of marriage. Sexual risk reduction is you can put yourself at risk. You can practice different things to reduce your risk. In other words, using condoms, lubrication, and because that's really not going to work, they then advocate for testing and, of course, going in for the abortion. And so, sexual risk reduction is the public health intervention used in comprehensive sex education. And the reason I want your audience to understand that is I want you to be educated. So when you go to your school or your health department, you understand that comprehensive sex education, its approach or its intervention is to teach children how to have sex and how to reduce their risk of getting a disease or becoming pregnant by using condoms and lubrication, and learning how to navigate the public health system without parents, how to access the testing, how to access the treatment for disease, how to access an abortion. And so when you see things or terms in public health, or even in a public school that says teaching children how to navigate the healthcare system, what they're teaching them is how to navigate government healthcare that is going to be paid for by taxpayers without parents knowing about it. That's what that actually means. And so I was a comprehensive sex educator for over 10 years, and I worked for a gay organization for 5 of those years. But really, in those 10 years, the world of comprehensive sex education, it's predominantly the LGBTQ community. But then I also became the Title X family planning training manager for the states of Texas and New Mexico. So I started off as a sex educator, walking the streets, talking about sex literally 40 hours a week out in the community, to then eventually at the end of my career, I was then working for a national training center, working with the Office of Population Affairs, the CDC.
And was that through Planned Parenthood?
So I was trained by Planned Parenthood, but I was never employed by them. So in my first 5 years of working as a sex educator, I was hired by a gay organization called the Austin Latino, Latina, Lesbian, and Gay Organization. And they had funding from the government to do HIV prevention in the communities and communities of color for both men who have sex with men and women of childbearing age. And we'll get back to what that term means, childbearing age. And so in that gay organization, I was definitely indoctrinated into learning about the gay population, being supportive of that population. And within a few months, they said, it's time for you to learn how to teach children this topic of sex education. And so Planned Parenthood was just across the street from our office. So I literally just went across the street. I'm the director of sex education of Planned Parenthood. And really, she was the director of sex education for Greater Austin, Texas. She took me in, she mentored me for years. And so she just gave me one-on-one training on how to teach children about sex. But she also, laid the foundation of why this was important, why I shouldn't disagree about children having sex. And so she really changed my mind in that, because at first, when she was telling me about the issues that they were seeing with children coming into their clinic, it sounded, and it was, sexual abuse of children. It wasn't right. It was incredibly abusive, unhealthy. And that was my first response to her. I said, okay, you've convinced me this is a real problem. This isn't something children are supposed to be involved in. How do I speak to the community? How do I speak to children to protect them from sexual activity? And she immediately, and you'll see this in the movie of the Mind Polluters reenacted, but she literally just patted me on the knee and she said, no, dear, we're not teaching them not to have sex. We're just teaching them how to do it safer. She said that children consent to sex, but every parent out there needs to know that that's against the law. For example, I don't know about in Indiana, but in Texas, you cannot legally consent to sex until you're 18 years old. So this lie that children can have sexual rights is exactly that. It's just a lie. And you have to look at what they mean by that. When the left basically says that children have sexual rights to have sex in childhood, what that's basic, they're equating it to basically it's a human right. That children have human rights to have access to being able to have sex. And when we think about human rights, there's always an oppressor. There's always someone who's trying to take that right away from you. That's the bad guy. But in this case, when the left and COS, Planned Parenthood, advocates for youth, the various LGBT organizations, when they say children have sexual rights to have sex in childhood, what they're basically saying is that anyone who disagrees with that is oppressing that child. And the number one person who is going to oppose children having sex is the parent, the family. And so this immediately demonizes parents. It immediately demonizes the family. They become the bad guy in the scenario. And none of this is by accident. This is their rhetoric on how to change people's minds and get into how they to be able to promote the programs that they want. Years ago, I predicted, this is just as long as we continue to accept this, as long as our states continue to allow this kind of education on children, inevitably we're going to see the legalization of pedophilia. And now we're seeing, that was probably 10 years ago when I started exposing this. And now we're seeing how the left is trying to change that language from pedophiles to minor attracted children. So this is just an attack on our children. It's probably the most institutionalized sexual abuse of our children across our nation.
Okay. What I want people to understand here is why would Convention of States be interested in this? Why are we concerned about this? And the reason being is that this is a program, comprehensive sex education. We're going to talk about different programs as we go through here, but these are programs that are generated from our government.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right?
Absolutely.
And one of the main pillars of the Convention of States resolution is to curtail the breadth and control of our federal government. To bring in the federal overreach. This is a prime example of where our government has overstepped, and so this is an area where I think we have an interest in with regard to calling a Convention of States for the purpose of proposing constitutional amendments that would address something like this. But am I right, Monica, in saying this, that these are government-generated programs that are being promoted out into our schools through the education department?
It is. When I mentioned earlier that our states have laws that children cannot consent to sex, but yet the government overreach is that now we have these federally qualified health centers bringing in federal money, federal health programs, Planned Parenthood being one of the clinics that is considered a federally qualified health clinic. They're getting federal money to do this. Title 10 is family planning. Family planning is providing birth control, pap smears, things like that. When my mentor at Planned Parenthood taught me about children coming into the clinic, she was advocating that these children get on birth control, that they get free access to condoms, lubrication, and the testing, all of that. And so what we see is that children do not have, our laws protect children from having, from being preyed upon sexually, which is why we have laws that say they cannot consent to sex, so that if someone violates them, we have the law to protect these children and to bring those people to justice. You arrest them, put them in jail. But then we have a federal program like Title 10 and many others, because the funding for STI testing, the funding for HIV testing, all children have access to all of that without parental consent. It will be paid for by federal money. So if children can't consent to sex, then why is it that our federal government can come in and essentially provide these kind of services to our children without parental consent? They're creating a problem. And parents are left out of the picture. There is no one better than a parent to care for those children when they're facing, if they do become sexually active just, on their own. A parent needs to be involved to help protect them, set boundaries, get them access to care. But in this case, we see the government reaching over saying, parents, we don't need you to take care of it. You don't know what you're doing. You're uneducated. You're probably just going to get mad and make things worse. So now the government just has to step in and do it for you.
So the parent is an obstacle. The parent is the problem.
Absolutely. Actually, one of the quotes that I share often when I do public speaking is Planned Parenthood. Every time I would train them, I actually at some point was training Planned Parenthood. I'm not proud of any of this, but I'm now able to expose it. But I was training them on client-centered counseling skills, management skills, all kinds of things. And at every workshop, inevitably, the topic of parents would come up. And they always said this, and this is a direct quote that I heard over and over again from Planned Parenthood. Parents are a barrier to service. As soon as a parent knows that their child's coming into a Planned Parenthood clinic, we never see that child again. So parents are a barrier to service. So we may see that the government wants parental involvement programs. The way they get away with that is by saying, oh, these are great ways to communicate with parents. And hey, parent, here's a pamphlet on parent involvement. And they give them out at a fair. And so now they've met what the government has said is parental involvement. They've passed out a bunch of pamphlets about it. They don't actually involve parents. They want to get them out of the picture. But this is also happening at Title X clinics, STI, sexually transmitted infection clinics, as well as HIV clinics and many others, more than we can even imagine. And so this is a real problem because they are replacing the family and they're not protecting those children. They're essentially giving them comprehensive sex education, encouraging them to continue in their high-risk behaviors, and giving them this false belief that condoms and lubrication is going to protect them. And then they say, of course, because they know it will not protect them from disease or pregnancy, then they say, make sure you get tested every 3 to 6 months for a disease. Don't be ashamed. Getting a disease is perfectly normal. That is the new language. I've seen many Planned Parenthood sex educators saying that. STDs are perfectly normal. So don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed of having sex. Don't be ashamed of getting a disease. It's completely normal. And it will get you the treatment. And if you get pregnant, it's also completely normal to have an abortion. And so they do all of this without parents even being aware of it. And we're seeing it in the public school system. Again, language like teaching our children how to navigate the healthcare system.
Monica?
And it's not just the disease, not just diseases. I also want to emphasize that Planned Parenthood and other clinics are giving children access to transing hormones.
Monica, we have
Yes.
a viewer question, and I guess what I need to preface the question with is you're mentioning Planned Parenthood, but then you also mentioned the Department of Education. Now, is it the Department of Education that is putting this into the schools?
Well, on a federal level, I would have to look at the Department of Education itself. I mostly look at what's happening in the states, but I do believe that it's a federal movement. And so what we're seeing in the states is that they're in an easy way to change and get this into schools. There are various ways that they do it. Number one, they're going to change the educational standards. So that's at a state level. And so what's really sneaky about that is that instead of changing a law, like, for example, in Texas for a long time, it was abstinence only. So instead of going through the law to change it, they went into the education standards to change it because you don't have to, it has the power of the law without actually being a law. So as long as you can get the state board of education to integrate these more modern and contemporary standards, then they get access to the kids. So what we are seeing is, for example, in Texas in 2020, our health standards were updated, and there was a big move to update it because they hadn't been updated in, I think, over 10 years or something. And so this was the chance to get comprehensive sex education in there. Now, we had some sex education standards, but they were very limited. Talking about STIs and HIV. It was not getting into details. It was just transmission, very, very, very simple, very basic information that still provided important information to the children about disease in general. But once they came in with these new health standards, it opened it up to character education, to relationships, to puberty. I mean, it just went on and on and on. Now, of course, many of the moms got involved, and we all worked together to try to get rid of a lot of those standards that we knew were very dangerous. What we ended up with was sexual risk avoidance. And that is what, again, a public health approach. Most people know it as abstinence, but it is a public health approach, which is just avoiding sex until marriage, is sexual risk avoidance. I warned the state board about even implementing sexual risk avoidance, because the issue with that, for two things, with It Takes a Family, I believe that the government should not replace the family in any way, form, or fashion, and especially in the topic of sex. So I was opposed to adding any health standards on sex because it's a family issue, not a public school, not a government issue. But number two, as soon as those standards are added to your, to your education system, that is just the minimum of what a teacher can teach. They can go above and beyond those standards. So in other words, it created an open door for comprehensive sex education. And I warned them, if you pass this, the first people who are going to celebrate this is not going to be the sexual risk avoidance people. It's going to be Planned Parenthood. It's going to be all their affiliates. And sure enough, as soon as it was passed, all of the abortion, LGBTQ organizations celebrated and said, finally, Texas has sex education in the schools.
I see.
Because they knew that they just needed the door to be opened.
You mentioned pass, so I think that answers this one viewer's question. He had this question was, can individual states refuse these programs?
Yeah.
So
yes, they can.
Yeah, if it's shot down or not passed, then we're basically refusing them. Is that statewide then?
For our state, yes. So there are those minimum standards, and so now it goes down to local control, where parents are working within their districts. And as many parents who are probably watching this right now, they know you have to become a professional investigator in your school to keep up with what programs they're actually teaching your children.
But if a state is refusing a program, a Title X program, they're refusing money, right?
Right. And so what I'm noticing is that most superintendents want this money. I believe that they're really being trained to accept this money. I mean, who doesn't want to? As soon as you bring in an organization, and we'll talk about the nuances of this, but it's very attractive to get more money for your school district. So getting a clinic in your school means more money for your school. So it goes on and on.
Yeah. Well, talk about the social emotional learning. Is that kind of embedded in all of this that we're talking about here? Really, I know that was a topic that we wanted to touch on.
Right. So social emotional learning is really tricky. Really, even comprehensive sex education and its standards, which are the National Sexuality Education Standards. You can find them on the COS website. They do say that even comprehensive sex education uses social learning theory. And so social emotional learning is a social learning theory. And you can find it in like Psychology Today if you just want to go see a simple definition of it. And it's really that children learn through observation, through social interaction, through modeling, through hearing, touching, things like that. And so with comprehensive sex education and other programs within the school, the use of social emotional learning has become incredibly popular. So the emotional part is where they're now saying that majority of our children are traumatized, majority of our children are depressed, majority of our children are having identity issues. But what we're seeing is it was the implementation of these programs that have caused a skyrocket. It's like if you look at just looking at the beginning of introducing these programs, that's when we start to see children getting worse mentally. And so in our little school district in Fredericksburg, Texas, talking to parents who have been here for generations, raised here, now raising their own children here, they didn't have a lot of these issues. Now, all of a sudden, the school is implementing mental health first aid, where they're constantly talking to the children about having social anxiety and depression and over again. And even the kids are telling their parents that they hear other kids constantly talking about depression, that they're depressed, and they just will walk up to someone and just say, I'm depressed. I have social anxiety. We're seeing it in the health textbook. They just recently adopted a new health textbook. In there, it also listed all these different mental challenges from mostly social anxiety. Well, of course, most teenagers have, so you don't diagnose them with social anxiety, but they're already a little self-conscious. And so when you start introducing all these psychological terms and definitions and diagnoses and have them diagnose one another, it's just going to exacerbate all of that. And that's what we're seeing. I don't believe, are there issues in our culture, social media and such, that are causing, our children to have I don't want to say mental health issues, but definitely creating depression, insecurities, confusion? Absolutely. But I do not believe that the social emotional learning is actually helping that. I think it's actually increasing the incidence of the depression. So what it's doing is that social emotional learning is really deconstructing a child's values and beliefs that they have already learned through their family. And then they reconstruct them into a new ideology, a new doctrine, the doctrine of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the doctrine of, don't be hateful, because you have to accept, you have to affirm, not just accept and be kind, but you have to affirm LGBT. And so that's what we're seeing, is that social emotional learning is more of a mental intervention on our children than it's actually helping. It's not helping them academically. It's really not for academics.
So if you're a young person, if you're a kid with all this anxiety, who do you turn to for help, and who do you trust in getting you through these? It's certainly not the parent. You don't want to talk to the parent. Yeah. You want to talk to one of the instructors or one of the adults in the program. Am I correct in saying that?
I think the reason that we're seeing that is because the teachers and the counselors at the school who are trained in social emotional learning are trained to be asking the children those kind of questions consistently. They are being told over and over again, like advertising, if you're not feeling well, if something's not right, come to my office, come and talk to me, come and be part of this group. So they're like walking advertisers for counseling and social emotional learning in the school. So yeah, if a child, like I said, already in the teenage years, you're a little insecure already. So if an adult takes an interest in you and your emotional, state, yeah, they're gonna want to go to that adult that seems very caring. But is that their place? Is that why we're sending our children to public school?
Right.
Are we sending them
Right.
for counseling? So what this approach is doing is it's broadcasting mental health interventions to all of the children rather than providing mental health services to children who actually or have been identified to need it. So it's kind of like saying a doctor comes into a school and vaccinates everyone, or provides an antibiotic to everyone, even if you don't need it.
Yeah.
That's broadcasting. So this is what social emotional learning is doing, is it's broadcasting this mental health to all of the children. But really what it is, if you look at most of the mental health interventions and programs that they're teaching these children, a lot of them have LGBTQ doctrine in them. And so it's really changing. Again, it's deconstructing our children and reconstructing them into a new doctrine.
Well, let's get into, we got to keep an eye on the clock here. Let's
Sure.
get into another topic here that, I don't know, kind of creates the shell where all this can take place. And that's this whole school, whole community, and whole child
Oh
concept.
yeah. Is that link in the comments? Go look at the CDC's whole school, whole community, whole child. I'll look at it on my website too, on my
Yeah,
internet.
we had intended on providing that image to everyone, but
Yeah.
I messed that up this evening. So
That's okay. You guys can just click on that and go look at it. There's the logo for this particular. If you go there, you'll see this blue and yellow logo with a child in the center. And what you'll notice is that this child is surrounded by community involvement, health education, physical education, and physical activity, nutrition, health services, counseling, social and emotional climate, physical environment, employee wellness, and then you also see family engagement. And what most parents don't see right away, or maybe now that so many parents are much more awake about what's happening in the public school system, and is that the family is basically on equal terms with everything else going around the children. And that is not how God created the family. We're not on equal terms with all of society. The family is over the child, and we give permission to others if we want them to educate our children. So I don't hand my child over to the government to be indoctrinated and to be changed and to be taken care of, and that they are now the new parent. I'm the parent, and I may give permission to someone to teach my child, but I'm still the authority. And what we're seeing in this program is that it takes parents out of authority. They become the authority, and you're just a part of their plan, a part of their program. You become a partner with them versus we are the authority, and I give permission. The parent gives permission if someone can intervene or have any kind of relationship with my child. And so when you go to that website, and I want every parent, every viewer to go look at this website, because you can also see their virtual healthy school. So if you look, go to that link. And if you go and look over on the left side, you'll see the virtual healthy school. And then you're going to see this photo or illustration, I guess, of a man in a suit. And he's got all these doors to the cafeteria, the gymnasium. And you can click on all of those images. And this is their dream of whole school, whole community, whole child. And so literally they have a doctor's office. You're going to see a doctor's office in the school with, and it's all illustrated and kind of like looking like a cartoon. They've got files, medical files, just like at any other doctor's office. They have a dentist office. They have a counseling office with rainbow flags or something. And I know they talk about diversity on some of the posters. They've got all of these services for the children. Everything. They're providing food. So it's like free food for everybody. I think part of the program is saying that you can drop off your kids earlier. They can stay later so that they can get more education or be part of other groups. And so basically, what I describe in the Mind Polluters is that this is a view into the complete institutionalization of our children. This is the government removing our children from our home where they provide them with all the things in the whole school, whole community, whole child. And at some point, you'll see another picture where they kind of take an eagle eye view of the school, and they have buildings around the school. The school becomes the hub where the children are. And then you see doctors' offices, mental health offices. You see all these things around the school. And so it just looks like you can see there, the only thing missing is a dormitory, really. That's the only thing missing from that school. Parents are optional. That's what this program is. Parents are optional. Unless you agree with everything that they're doing, you're absolutely optional. And it reminds me a lot of the 15-minute city. The school is the hub with all the resources all around it. You don't have to go any further than that. This is your little community. This is your little hub. It's very, very scary. But one point that I make in the Mind Polluters is that parents are loving it, though. And you're probably thinking, what do you mean parents love this program? Well, hey, I work full time and I don't have to take my child to the doctor because they're right there at the school. My child has a toothache. No problem. There's a dentist there. My child might be having sex. No problem. They've got Title 10 programs there. They got a clinic there. My child needs mental health. Okay. There's a counselor there. I forgot to pack lunch. No problem. I've got food there. It's replacing the family, so if we're not vigilant, we think, oh, this is a benefit to the families. This is helping families. This is allowing families to go work, parents to work full time. Right. But if we're not vigilant, what we don't realize, it's the complete institutionalization of our children.
Yeah.
Was this do you think this was the nucleus behind the Hillary Clinton "it takes a village" comment?
I think absolutely, which is exactly why I created It Takes a Family to go get that, because that is exactly it. That even
that is the village, isn't it? That is the village.
Yeah. There is the village. And do I believe that other people can help with your children and yes, but the family chooses who their village is. In this case, the government is choosing your village, and they become the parent. And so you might have people in your lives, neighbors, friends, your church family, who you choose them to influence your children. So we do create little villages around our children, but we choose that. The government doesn't choose that.
Very, very important point. Well, in the last few minutes that we've got here, Monica, let's talk about how does a parent recognize? Maybe a parent doesn't know this is going on in their schools. How does a parent recognize what are some things that they need to be on the lookout for, and obviously what can parents do? What concern not only parents but concerned individuals? What can we do to offset this?
Well, parents, like I said, if your child is at public school, be prepared to become a professional investigator, because it's no longer simply asking a question and that you're going to get a real answer.
It has changed. It's changed it quite a bit, hasn't it? Being a parent these days.
It used to be that they would announce sex education and give you a time to go look at curriculum, and you could actually look at it. And I think now there might be some where you can do that, but there's a lot. And as a former comprehensive sex educator, there's a lot that is said and done that's not in a written curriculum. So it's again, if it's not something you want your child involved in, opt them out. I think, many of my friends who have decided to stay in public schools, they give their schools a very lengthy opt-out letter. I'm opting them out of all sex education. I'm opting them out of any conversations about LGBTQ or sex. I'm opting them out of any social emotional learning or any kind of mental health program, class, curriculum, activity. I mean, just on and on. And, many schools now have third-party vendors that come into the school, like Communities in Schools. And so Communities in Schools is one of the largest providers of mental health in our nation. And they're a nonprofit organization getting a lot of money from the federal government, as well as from the local school districts that they work with. They provide case management and mental health services. And I have actually on my podcast and on my YouTube channel, I showed the training that their staff goes through on a national level. They are supportive of DEI. They are supportive, not just supportive, but they are very much LGBTQ, not just friendly, but even the trainers, the counselors at the schools are men who dress like women, and they're counseling children. So it's Communities in Schools is all over our nation and in our schools, and they're a third-party vendor. So why is that important to know? Obviously, you want to know if they're in your school, but you could ask your school, are you providing mental health services? They might actually say no. Why? Well, because they're not really lying, because it's Communities in Schools that's providing it.
Okay.
They just come in, right? And
Okay.
so what's really sneaky is that when Communities in Schools or any third-party vendor comes in, they bring in a service. They don't need to get permission from your school board on approval on what they do, because this is what they do. So if you've signed a contract to bring them in, they're bringing everything with them. So there's these third-party vendors that you have to be really careful about. So literally becoming an investigator, learning how to write a FOIA and find out, submit it to find out what kind of mental health interventions are you providing. A FOIA asking who are your third-party vendors, and just go. You might have to ask lots and lots of questions to even know what's going on at your school.
Monica?
I mean, our school was about to bring in Communities in Schools, and parents had no idea until we saw it on the agenda and we exposed it.
Monica, some of our viewers may know people that are actually in favor of these type of programs. I'm curious to kind of help on that side of things. What was the turning point for you, based on your background and your experience? What was the turning point?
The turning point for me, it was a long process, to be honest. Even as a comprehensive sex educator, and I actually worked alongside Communities in Schools for a while as well, because they would invite me to do comprehensive sex education at the schools when they were there. The turning point was, one, the teens. As I started, I have a bachelor's in psychology. I'm not a counselor though, but I really was really good and was very well trained on how to listen closely. A lot of active listening skills. And what I started realizing from the questions from the teens is their dissatisfaction or even a dislike of the sexual activities they were involved in. And I listened to that and I respected that. And realizing that these kids didn't actually want to do these things, but they felt they were expected to do it. And so I often share the story of this 13-year-old girl, and I don't know how much time we have, so I'll make it short as possible. And she and these other 13-year-olds, it was boys and girls in this class, and they were at a high-risk school, really. They were at an alternative school. They'd been kicked out of many schools, and they were in the middle of East Austin. Anyway, I say that only to say that they were considered at-risk youth. So her question, and I'll clean up her question, she was not being disrespectful, but she basically said that she was involved in an activity, a sexual activity that made her gag, and she wanted me to teach her how to do it better. And I was able to recognize that she didn't actually like that activity, but she thought it was an expected activity. And so she was forcing herself to do it. And she wanted me to maybe help her find ways for it not to be so where she didn't dislike it so much. So instead of giving her what she thought she needed, I actually said, have you ever considered just not doing the thing you don't like to do? Now, I was still a comprehensive sex educator, but I cared for her more than the agenda. And at that moment, all of those children, Planned Parenthood said, if you ever tell kids not to have sex, they're going to feel judged. You're going to make them feel ashamed. Don't you ever do that. And that's all comprehensive sex education. These kids did not look ashamed and they did not look judged, but they all looked at me, and maybe their behaviors were not innocent, but they did look like innocent children all of a sudden. And I realized these kids have no idea they don't have to do these things. And so I told them, do you realize you don't have to have sex? And if you don't have sex, and I had the various forms of sex written on the board behind me, along with the bodily fluids that transmitted disease. And I said, look at this list. If you're not involved in these activities, you will not be in contact with these bodily fluids. And if you're not, then you don't get a disease and you don't get pregnant. You don't have to worry about all this other stuff. And like that, those children huddled together and started talking about ways that they could hang out without having sex, playing basketball, watching movies at the community center because they were free and they had free snacks. They were embracing abstinence without even saying the word abstinence, because it's what they wanted. And they just needed an adult to give them permission to not do the very thing that they really didn't want to do. One of the little girls pulled away and she said, I can't do what they're doing. Right. I can't stop. She was literally saying, right. I can't stop. So what do you mean you can't stop? She said, well, I'm doing it and now everyone expects me to do it. I can no longer say no. And she was really, again, it's those listening skills. What she was really asking is, give me permission. Tell me I really can say no. And I said, honey, you can say no. No one has the right to tell you that you have to have sex. Even if you've already done, it doesn't matter. You can say no at any moment. Her little shoulders just dropped. She relaxed, she smiled, and she joined the rest of the kids to talk about playing basketball, playing sports with each other. So that was one of my turning points, but it was also having my own child, and it was also coming to Christ. Once those things all together came around, and especially when the scales fell from my eyes, because guys, I didn't just teach it, I was living the same philosophy. I was also a high risk adult. And so once I came to Christ, I just saw things completely differently. And I started realizing that the people coming into my office, their needs were not going to be met by an intervention that was giving them free condoms and lubrication and getting tested for diseases and having abortions. That's not a solution. It's a secular solution, and it doesn't work. A secular solution is not going to solve a secular problem. And so I'm very committed to teaching people the truth.
All right, guys, we're going to have to wind it up there. We actually went beyond the time allotted for this.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Monica, I think we need to bring you back again, and
I would love that.
Talk further about this. I think,
and we'll make sure that all the technology is working. We'll get things.
You better believe it. I promise. I'm going to do a better job on this. I'm already.
It happens, Dale. You're doing a great job. Obviously, you have.
I know what I need to do, and I failed to do it this time. So I'd like to generally blame Ken in some way for this, but now I got to take responsibility for this. So, okay, Monica. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And like I said, we're gonna bring you back. Thank you.
Thanks,
You're
Monica.
welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, that was good, Ken. I think we're gonna cut some things short here because we went over, believe it or not.
Well, but I think we had to. We just Monica
yes.
had so much there, and the amazing thing to me at the very end was it found that kids. That people were finding out that kids enjoy being kids.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I've told Monica this when we were rehearsing leading up to this, that it is difficult being a parent today. It is very, very, it's altogether different than when we were young, Ken, and I'm even older than you. But my wife was just saying, "Oh, I remember health class when we had health." Well, it's not at all like
No,
today.
it was
It's
a
all
video, and yeah, that's about it, But yeah, I agree. I think we're, society is forcing kids to grow up way too fast to become adults when they're 12, and I think kids are clamoring, as she said, they're clamoring for the approval to be a kid, to go out and play basketball, swim, have fun, go out and camp, whatever. But
yeah.
instead, we're teaching them how to change their gender. Just amazing.
Well, let's talk about what's coming up here, Ken. On next week, the 15th, we're going to talk about adopting children. We here a while back, a few months ago, we did a show on safe haven baby boxes. And so I wanted to do a show on what happens to these kids that are dropped off. And how does the adoption process go? And so we're working on next week having a couple agencies represented that help orphans, help children get adopted. So looking forward to that next week on Monday on COS Indiana Live. Then the following week is our roundtable. And we have a topic now for the roundtable, and this ought to be interesting, Ken. And that is Liberty Wins at the Supreme Court. This is a topic that John Ackerman picked out. That
looking forward to that.
He wants, so it ought to be very, very interesting. Yep. And then want to mention that we've got another episode of COS Indiana Live Voices, which is our podcast, be episode number 15. And I just interviewed Tim Heidenreich, our prayer leader here for the state. And so he has a very interesting life. And so we feature him. He'll be in the next episode number 15, which you can find that on Spotify.com for those of you interested in listening to our podcast that we generate. And I also want to mention that if anyone has a comment or a question after the broadcast ends tonight that you would like to submit, you can email us at raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. That's raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. So, Ken, I think that's going to wind it up for us tonight. Once again, I apologize for messing up the broadcast tonight, and I know what I've got to do to correct a lot of the things that happened tonight. So I'll get those things correct.
Over Dale, you're allowed to have one that happened starts off that way.
Well, you think so? I don't know. I've been doing after 252 broadcasts. You would think that one would have this down pat, but that's not the case. So
I think you could ask Tucker Carlson about that. He'd probably tell you you're absolutely wrong on that.
All right. Well, folks, we'll wrap it up here this evening, and I look forward to seeing everyone next Monday on COS Indiana Live. Everyone, have a good evening. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Good night.